Perfect. So, Stephanie, take it away.
Good morning, everybody. Want to welcome you to this virtual intro to escrow fun time. I thought we'd talk a lot today about typical things that happen in an escrow, and then also just kind of give you some insight on things that have changed with the current environment, how we're handling different situations, what's affected us, and what it looks like today in this environment for an escrow. So let's get going.
Trying.
That's all right.
There we go.
So, escrow holder, what's our role? What's our job? We're the neutral party of the transaction. We're here to take instruction from everyone. Oftentimes, people will look to us for the answers of how to do and what to do, but we have to be really careful with that role of not offering any advice in what we're doing. We've come across lots of different scenarios. We're happy to give you different possibilities and potential outcomes, but one thing that we are not is we're not the person to advise people how the transaction should go, what buyers and sellers should do. We're simply there to receive instructions, documents, funds, follow those instructions to close out the transaction. We have to have mutually signed instructions for anything we do. Can't just be signed by a single party. So that's kind of in a nutshell, what we're doing as an escrow holder. We're the middle person for everybody. So this visual kind of gives you an idea of who we're taking instructions from, which is everybody. We're taking instructions from the buyer, the seller, the agents, the lenders, anybody that has invoices that they're submitting to us. Everybody's kind of throwing all the information at us, and it's our job to receive it, make sure that it's correct, and then follow those instructions. Some things that help an escrow go smoothly and successful. First one is complete information. I like to say that one of the most basic things that we need from you when the transaction starts is your client's contact information, phone number and email address, especially right now that a lot of things are being done virtually and online is critical, especially for us to have an opportunity to reach out to them at the beginning of the transaction. So complete contact information is the first. Communication. Is there anything special about this transaction that we need to know? If you know something, tell us. Don't wait for us to have to go hunt the information down and find out that the sellers are in the middle of a divorce and we've just tried to schedule an appointment for the two of them together, and that causes a big fight. If the buyer is married and not purchasing the property with their spouse, and you have knowledge of that, maybe give us a heads up so that we can be proactive about getting information and documentation that we need for the file. Is somebody getting ready to leave the country? Happens all the time. People get into escrow and they leave the country, and then we're scrambling to get documents signed. So let us know so we can take care of that stuff ahead of time. Setting realistic expectations with your clients. I would say this is a really important one in this current environment because a lot of things are taking longer right now just because of how we're having to work. We're conducting signings with a lot of mobile notaries. They're being called by all of the title companies. And so it's quite common right now that by 12 o'clock in the afternoon, almost all of the notaries that we can use are booked for the rest of the day. So if we get loan docs at 2 o'clock, we might be able to get them worked up, but might not be able to schedule your clients to sign until the next day. So I feel like in a lot of ways, gone are the days of getting loan documents in the morning, signing, funding, and recording all in one day. So don't set that expectation for your client that, oh, we're going to get loan docs, record, and get your keys the same day. Give a little bit of room for the work to be completed on the file so that they're not stranded in the driveway with a moving truck not able to get moved into the house. Have patience. Like I said, the notaries being booked, us having limited options for getting customers signed right now, things are just Every day is a new adventure, sometimes a new challenge. Just know that we're not here to impede your transaction. Our goal is to get it closed on time and with little issues. So know that we really are working for you, and just have patience for us to get that work completed. And be flexible. If your buyer wanted to sign, at 2 o'clock, can't get them signed till 6 o'clock. If we need to make some changes, let's all just be working together right now, I think is a key for what we've been going through. What to provide when you open escrow. Let's see. Contract, fully executed and legible. I have a lot of contracts that get sent over that have been scanned back and forth. Some people aren't using DocuSign still, and it's hard to read the contract. We have to be able to read it to know what the agreement says, and it has to be signed by everybody. Contact information for all parties. This is also key because we have a cool program that I'll probably talk about in a minute, that we can send out an introductory email to your clients that they can complete information for the file on their time in a secure way to have it submitted. But like I said, we have to have phone number and email to be able to securely get that to them. Special circumstances we talked about. Is there a divorce? Is somebody going out of the country? Anything that we need to know that might be unusual for this transaction, give us a heads up on that. Commission amount and splits. You guys want to get paid. You're not doing this, out of the kindness of your heart. You're working hard for these files to close. Tell us the commission when you open the escrow. Let us know what the split is so we can get those instructions out to everybody. Power of attorney. Talked about this a minute. One thing that I did want to say about a power of attorney is if it's being used for your seller, if you know that somebody has a power of attorney, maybe give us a call when you're taking the listing agreement. Let us know what the circumstances are for why that's being used so that we can send it to the title department for approval. Not all power of attorneys are created equal. There's different rules that have to be followed. If someone is using it for a medical reason, then a lot of times we're going to need to have doctor's notes in the file that support that reason. So you're always welcome, if you know there's a power of attorney that's going to be used, to contact us before you go into contract so that we can let you know everything that's going to be needed for that. We have a mobile signing service that our company owns. We can conduct signings all over the country. If your seller lives out of state, that's not a problem. Do give us a heads up on that. There are some states in the US that are attorney states. And so those notary fees are a lot higher. So if we know what state your seller is signing in, then we can plan for that, quote for it, and that way they're not shocked when they have a really expensive notary fee because they're in an attorney state. If there's tenants in the property, are we transferring rents and security deposits? Give us that information so that we can apply it correctly to the transaction. Divorces and deaths and trusts. Is the property owned in a trust? If the sellers that were listed on the trust are no longer living, let us know when you open the transaction. We'll need to see a copy of the trust to determine who the successor trustee is. That's the person that the trust designated to have the signing authority when the original trustees passed on. That's also something that we're happy to review for you before you open the transaction, so we make sure that you have the right person signing. Sometimes we'll get into escrow and the agent has had one person signing for the trust, and then we get a copy of the trust and see that they actually named both of their kids to act as successor trustees. And so we needed two signatures, not just the one. So good to have that information up front so that you're not scrambling to have it corrected later on. Is the property in a condominium or a planned unit development? Do we need to order homeowners association documents? Those are important things for us to know so we can order them right away. There's a lot of associations in town that have started using third-party companies to provide the documents for the association, and many of those require an upfront payment from the parties, and they won't provide those documents until that payment's received. So the sooner we know that there's an HOA, we can get that ordered and get that taken care of. So a lot of them take at least 7 days to provide. Home warranties, we don't order those. I get that question a lot, and we actually do not order home warranties. We don't have specific knowledge of the property, if there's a pool that needs to be covered. So we do ask that agents order the home warranties on the file. Natural hazard disclosures, we will order. I know a lot of agencies order those up front with their listings, and that's great. If you already have it, send it to us. If you want us to order it when the escrow has been opened and you have a preferred company you want us to use, let us know. Happy to get that ordered. And there's solar. Solar is so fun. All solar companies are different. With the market volume right now, solar companies are seeing extremely long turn times for transfers, for release documents. So I would say if there's solar on the property and you know, have the seller contact their solar company as soon as the contract's been signed so that they can notify them of the transfer, get that process started. I've had a lot of transactions delayed because of solar, because the buyers will oftentimes want to wait to sign the credit application documents and sign the transfer agreement until the appraisals come in. They know that they have their final loan approval. But when they do that, and I completely understand the reasoning for why they would want to, um, a lot of times the solar companies can't get the transfer completed and the release documents to us in time to close, and the escrow is delayed. A lot of the solar companies have outsourced the transfer process to third parties, and we can call, sit on hold for 45 minutes to an hour just to get an update and be told, no, they don't do rushes. It's 3 to 5 days turn time for every section of the transfer process, for submitting the application, for getting it reviewed, for them drawing the transfer agreement and sending it all out. So solar can take a long time sometimes. So don't wait on solar. What happens in escrow? What do we do? Um, Escrow's open, we get the contract, earnest money deposit gets brought into us. Our office is for the time being still closed to the public, but we're still receiving earnest money deposit checks. We have a drop box out front. People can leave it there. We go out and pick those checks up several times a day. We also have a program called Start Safe that I mentioned briefly earlier, of sending out an email to your clients so they can provide the information we need for the file. It'll allow them, if they're the seller, to tell us if they have loans on the property, give us their loan information, if there's an HOA, for them to let us know about that. But a new feature for the buyer that's cool is that it gives them an option to deposit their earnest money electronically. And it's kind of like when you deposit checks with your own cell phone for your bank, you take a picture of the front and back of the check and deposit it. So they'll still have to write out a check payable to Chicago Title, but they can use that to deposit it wherever they're at so that they don't have to come stop by the office to drop the check off. Right now, that's only being used for the earnest money deposit. We don't use it for closing funds, but that is a new feature that I think is cool and might save people some time. Next thing we do is we issue the preliminary title report and work with everybody to clear title. So title report's going to show matters of record that show up against the property at that time. So it'll have a date on it. That's our plant date that says that as of this date, this is everything that's showing against this property. It'll show taxes. It'll show any liens and judgments that we need to deal with, current loans. If there is leased solar, it'll show up on there. And then we can work with the solar company on the transfer. Owned solar does not show up on the prelim. So if someone says that they have owned solar and then we get the title report and there's some solar notices on there, then something's not adding up quite right there, and need to address that. We're going to create document packages to be signed by the buyer and the seller. Information that we need, disclosures that you need for your file, signing off on the preliminary title report approval letter, things like that. We prepare the commission instructions to send out, and then we're going to receive any invoices that need to be paid according to the contract. So briefly, I talked about the prelim giving you a picture of what's on title. It's going to show you any potential liens and judgments that are on there. One thing that the prelim may ask for is, you'll notice it asks for a statement of information. So the statement of information is going to be run to make sure that there's no liens that can attach to the property based on a person's name. So if they have a common name, John Smith, Linda Johnson might be kind of common these days. We're going to ask for a statement of information from them so we can make sure there's no child support, judgments, outstanding tax liens, things like that that need to get addressed. When you get your prelim, it's important for you to read it. I want to make sure that it looks like we've searched the right property, that if your seller told you that they own this free and clear, but you see a deed of trust on it, then that's a red flag. The prelims that we're issuing on residential properties right now have a super cool feature called Live Look, that when you get one, you can click on it and it brings it up kind of in a color-coded version, green, yellow, and red, so that it's easier to identify items that might be a red flag and you should ask a question about. And even if you don't know what it means, just call us, email us, ask us, hey, I noticed this was on the prelim. Is this a big deal? Is it getting addressed? And your escrow officer will be super impressed that you read your prelim. So fun fact, read your prelims. Statement of information, also called the SI, that's what we're going to use to clear any liens up against the buyer or seller. Closing costs. Who pays for things? So this is just kind of a typical situation of what is paid in the transaction. Loan fees are going to be paid by the buyer. Title and escrow fees. We'll refer to the contract for how those are split. Customary for Fresno County is for the seller to pay for the owner's policy of title insurance, buyer and seller to split the escrow fee half and half, and then the transfer tax to be paid by the seller. But those are paid by contract. So if the parties have agreed to something different, then we'll refer to the contract of how those are to be split. The lender's policy is typically paid by the buyer. And that's the policy of title insurance issued to the buyer's lender. Owner's policy is the policy that gets issued to the buyer, gives them clear and marketable title. The buyer is going to prepay homeowner's insurance for the year. We'll pay that through escrow. We're going to prorate property taxes, HOA dues, and then the buyer is going to prepay interest on their new loan. Mortgage loan interest is charged in arrears. So if you're making your mortgage payments, when you've paid for your November payment, the interest with that payment is actually covering the previous month. So because that interest is charged up front in the escrow, the buyer will skip a month and not make a payment until the following month. So all the escrows that are closing in November, buyer's first payment will be due January 1st.
Trying to click.
So lender tells you, calls you, says, docs are out to escrow. They have loan docs. What happens next? Well, we get the loan docs. It's not ready to go at that point. Once we get the loan docs, then that's kind of when we switch into high gear of the closing process. So the first thing we do when we get those is we get them downloaded, review them, and then we figure the file, which means we take the information from the loan docs and the lender's fees, input those into the closing statement so we can generate that for the buyer. We're going to make sure that there's no outstanding funding conditions that the lender needs, make sure that the seller has signed their documents and their closing disclosure, and then we're going to schedule the buyer to sign those docs. Once they're signed, we have to send them back to the lender for review. They'll review the signed docs, let us know if there's any other outstanding conditions, and then they'll get the loan funded. Buyer's funds have to get deposited once they've signed. That's usually when we'll let the buyer know how much is needed to close. A lot of times lenders will try to hurry the closing process along and ask the buyers to deposit their funds before the loan docs are in. I hesitate to do that sometimes just because I want to make sure I have all the information from the documents, make sure that nothing is missed, and then the buyer ends up short to close and has to, write a check for the difference. The other danger with that is the wire fraud that's very prevalent in our industry right now. I have a much higher comfort level with printing out the documents, handing the buyer the wiring instructions in person at their signing appointment, and then having them wire their funds that way rather than receiving an email and asking them to send the funds before the loan docs have even been signed. Once the lender has funded the loan, they've signed off on all the conditions, and we receive the loan funds, then we're going to release the file to record. Our job doesn't end at that point to just release it. There's still some final steps that get taken with the title department. Remember how I said the title report, when it's issued, has an effective date as of that date? Well, when we release our file to record with the title department, they have to do what's called a date down. So they go back and they have to check the recorded documents from the time that the prelim was issued, that date, with the current plant date to make sure that nothing else has been recorded in that time frame. And it's happened before where something pops up. Somebody had a judgment that got recorded during that time period. I've had deeds get recorded that affected the vesting. So it is possible that things can pop up at that last minute that would cause the transaction to pause while things get addressed and resolved. It doesn't happen very often, but it has. And that's why we do that date down, is to make sure that nothing else has changed in the matter that title's been held. File gets released. Recorder, Fresno County recorder records the documents, sends us back confirmation, and then we say, yay, congratulations, you're on record. And that means that the county has recorded all the documents, the transfer is complete between the buyer and the seller. Recordings have been continuing as normal. We record electronically with the Fresno County Recorder's Office. So while they also remain close to the public, we've still been able to record our documents electronically, and we can do that every day, basically all day. I would say up until about 2:30 is the cutoff to release and still be able to record the transaction that day. So the file's on record. We've given you confirmation. Where's my check? Once the file gets recorded, then we have to go back through, make sure that everything, we check it one more time, make sure all the invoices are included, all the checks are detailed, everything balances out. Then we disperse the file. The first things that we send out, that's our highest priority, is the payoff of the seller's existing loans, because those continue to accrue interest until the funds are received by that lender. So we want to get the payoffs out first. Once the payoffs are out, then the next priority for us is to get out broker commissions, seller proceeds, buyer's funds, things like that. So especially right now with the volume of closings that we're doing on a daily basis, those disbursements are prioritized based on those funds, payoffs out first, broker checks, commissions, things like that. So I know most escrow officers have a goal to get the files dispersed the same day. Sometimes it'll roll over to the next morning if we have a late recording and we don't get confirmation until, 4 o'clock, 4:30 in the afternoon. But just know that that's at that point our highest priority, to get all that money out as soon as possible. Because once the escrow is closed, we don't want to be sitting on any funds. We want everything out, close the file, be done. Ooh, I talked fast.
You talked super fast.
I'm sorry if I talked too fast.
No,
Anybody have questions on all that exciting information?
There's a question in the chat, Stephanie. It says, what's the average cost to obtain HOA info through the third-party companies?
It varies. Harlan Ranch is about, I want to say, between $350 and $365. I&I Property Management, I think theirs are around $250 to $275. So it just varies on the management company.
And Stephanie, one thing we didn't really put into the slide, but When there's a conflict on if you're going to close that day or people trying to pull the closing forward, how do you work with all the different parties to make sure that everybody is in agreement and ready to close?
So escrow works on written instruction. If somebody doesn't want to close, they have to deposit an instruction to us to not close. One thing that I do on my files is I prepare what I call a final instruction to be signed with the seller's documents and the buyer's documents that say all of the provisions of the contract have been met and that the parties are ready to close. So I do get that signed on my escrows, but we rely on written instructions and mutual instructions. But from an escrow standpoint, we're going to continue on in the transaction until somebody disagrees. If people are in disagreement, we have no choice but to stop and wait until they have come to an agreement.
So I don't see any, it says who pays for the cost to obtain HOA docs?
That's going to be marked on your contract. There's a box that says who's going to pay for the transfer fee and the fee for the documents to be prepared. So if you know that there's an HOA on that when you're writing up an offer, make sure that you check the box for who you want to have pay. Customarily, it's the seller, but again, we will always defer to what was agreed in the contract for that.
So at this time, there's no other questions in the chat. If anybody wanted to just unmute themselves and ask a question, we've got some time for that.
Any weird scenarios that you've come across that you want to run by us? We get that a lot.
Stump the escrow officer, anything like that?
I have, sorry, this is Wayne Jordan with Realty Concepts. Is this going to be available? Can you make some of these, like I really like, because I'm a newer agent, the list you had on what I need to provide escrow so my nice escrow officer doesn't have to call me up for all the things that I've forgotten?
Certainly, certainly. We usually will send a copy of the recording and the slides to everybody that registered. And then if you need different information, we're happy to get that to you.
Thank you.
So Amy Nelson wanted to know how you open escrow. So should they call you? Should they text you? Should they email you? Stephanie,
Yeah,
how
not a
does
dumb question.
escrow actually get opened? There
Yeah.
are no dumb questions.
Email us the contract, and if you want to call first, introduce yourself, talk about any of the particulars of the transaction, we welcome that. But best thing to do is email over a copy of the contract and then any of the information that we're going to need, contact information for the parties, commission amounts, things like that.
And often in Fresno County, the listing agent will handle that for the transaction, but not 100% of the time, correct? Okay.
Now, I have a quick question. I wanted to know who actually removes, certain people from the actual title. So let's say it's a husband and wife. The wife can't be on the loan and things like that. Is that something that escrow takes care of, or is that something that the lender has to do ahead of time?
Like for the buyer, that the wife can't be on title?
Yeah, so I just had a closing where the wife had to be removed, but she wants to be able to put herself back on after title's done. So I was just kind of curious how that works.
So there's a couple of ways to do that. What I tell people when they're buying, if they are married, is talk to your lender first, see if that loan program that you're in allows for the spouse to be on title but not on the loan. And I know for a lot of conventional financing they can do that, where the spouse will be on title to the property and have to sign a couple of the loan forms, but they won't sign the note. They won't be responsible for the loan. If they can't do that, I know FHA, I don't think you can, and then the down payment assistance ones, you can't do that either. Then just the one spouse that's on the loan will be entitled by themselves. And then after the the escrow closes, they can, you know, seek out a paralegal or a document preparation company to add the other spouse back to title. We just can't do it in the escrow if it conflicts with the lender's instructions.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Mhm. I guess one other thing I would say that's come up during COVID is if people are out of the country that need to sign. I've had a couple where a spouse is out of the country and needs to sign off on that spousal deed. Typically, we'll ask them to go sign at the consulate or the US Embassy in the country that they're in. But right now, those are all closed because of COVID. So there's different signing requirements depending on what country they're in. So that's another thing to look into ahead of time, because it might take longer to get things notarized in foreign countries right now.
And Stephanie, this is another just COVID sensitive thing. What if somebody who's in the transaction, a buyer or seller, comes down with COVID and yet they still want to sign?
I think we wait. We have to wait. We're not approved to do, California is not approved to do remote notarizations or signings right now. That's something that has to be approved at the state level, and each county has to approve that for notarized documents. And we've not done that yet in California. So we've had a couple of transactions where that's happened, and we've just had to wait until those parties are cleared to be able to sign.
Perfect. All right, any other questions? Oh, here's one from Christine Cortez. If solar purchase is not on the prelim, does escrow just rely on the agent seller to relay any payoff info? And have you come across any purchased solar that are transferable, or have you seen most purchased solar required to be paid off? So
that's a really good question, because one thing that we have seen are people getting unsecured loans for their solar. And if they have a solar loan that's not on title, we will not automatically pay that off and cannot pay it off unless the new buyer's lender instructs us to pay that off in the escrow. Otherwise, we would just send the proceeds to the seller and they would have to pay that personal loan off themselves, because we can only pay off liens of record without the lender's written instruction. So like owned solar, things like that, I've been asked to transfer warranties and things of that nature, which we're not going to do. We're only going to deal with the solar transfers that are on title. So the buyer and the seller would have to deal with that directly in themselves.
So Christine, I hope that answers your question. If for any reason it doesn't, you're welcome to unmute and ask Stephanie for some extra info.
We order the prelim, Amy. Yeah. When the order is opened, that's the first thing that happens automatically. Is our open order sheet goes to the title department. They start the search process and work on the prelims. Most prelims take about 2 to 3 days. If it's a more complicated property and requires additional searching, then it can take longer. But normally the title department will contact us and let us know if that is the situation for that one, so we can give you a heads up. This one's probably going to take a little bit longer to search.
And Stephanie, we recently experienced the creek fire in the Shaver Mountain area, affecting some transactions in Shaver, Prather, and Auberry. So as an escrow holder, what did you see? How was the effect on transactions? Are things back to normal now?
Transactions were put on hold for that time period. Anything that was in an evacuation area, lenders put those on hold. Insurance companies, weren't able to issue new policies on those. So it just kind of put a lot of transactions on hold for a few weeks. As far as I can tell, things have returned to normal. I've had a couple close in the Auberry and Prather area. I think I even had a refinance close recently on a Shaver property. So it seems like things are getting back to normal up there.
All right. Well, it looks like that's all of the questions that we have. So we're finishing up early, but just know again that if you need any additional information, you're welcome to reach out to your Chicago Title sales executive, to Stephanie, or to me, and we will get you the info that you need. So thank you, everyone, and best wishes for a great rest of your day.
Thank you.